Welcome to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, where we bring you the most interesting and enlightening conversations around movement practice and how you can become the most heroic version of yourself through pursuing movement that's relevant to your nature. This is a podcast that's going to feature some of the top movers in the world, some of the most amazing movement thinkers, and people from fields that are related to movement as far afield as evolutionary theory, strength and conditioning, and everything in between. So if you're interested in movement, please stick around. And if you like our work and want to support it, please consider supporting us on Patreon, because this podcast is completely listener supported. We don't want to take any advertising. We don't want to interrupt your experience of watching the show. So what really helps us get the best thinkers on, have the time to put these together, have the best quality for you guys as far as audio and video is your support. So please consider supporting us and enjoy the rest of the show. This week on the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, our guest is Amos Rendao. Amos Rendao is one of the owners of Apex Movement and Parkour EDU. He's a leading thinker in the parkour community on break falls, or Ukemi as he calls them, as well as Randori and many other aspects of parkour theory. He's an old friend of mine. We go back to 2009. I've stayed in his place. He stayed at mine. We've had lots of really interesting conversation over the years. And I think he's one of the most interesting thinkers in the whole parkour community and a really amazing mover as well. So I'm really excited to share this with you guys. Without further ado, Amos Rendao.
Bring it in like Brandon Douglas, like, hey, we're on, like something like that.
1, 2, 3, 4, and you're on. Amos Rendao, old friend of mine. Great to have you. Welcome on the podcast. How are you, man?
Feeling good. How you doing today?
Good. I'm doing really well. So you are a parkour teacher, also deep background in martial arts. I know you've been playing around with dance, or at least were the last time I was chatting with you. You've been traveling the world doing parkour stuff, done a lot of parkour competitions. What do you want the audience to know about you before we dig deep into all these crazy topics?
I think you put it straight. That's what my life's like right now.
So I'm going to just tell people a story about you because I think it's funny and it's a good way to introduce you.
Oh, great.
So my first memory of you was at the Apex Moving Jam in 2011, I think. And we were hanging out with Emily Sisson, then Justin Ganguly, at a restaurant, like a little burrito bar, and she was quizzing you on how to be homeless.
Yeah, it was true. Yeah, spreading the good word.
Yeah, and so you're there with your long like Jedi braid and your ratty clothes, telling people about how to camp out on roofs. And I was like, oh man, this dude is a hippie. And
I remember that. I remember you and both Tyson and you were pretty standoffish to me at first after that.
But then not long after that, you came and stayed with us. Like you came and slept on my couch.
I'm a respectful couch guy.
Yeah,
Don't break any rules.
No, you're great. You're great. It's super good time. Really got to know you. And what's been funny to me over the years is that it's like, you know, in some ways you and I are really very different, right? Like I come from a hippie upbringing, kind of like a more square lifestyle now, really on the opposite ends politically. But like the things that we've gotten interested in movement have had this parallel over and over and over again. So,
also, interestingly, I come from a conservative background.
Yeah.
I went the other direction. So me and you kind of just crossed the middle. I've always found that charming about you, like stories about your parents.
Yeah.
And with your present, like more leaning conservative beliefs, I was like that.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, but yeah, we've had these opposite paths in some ways in life, and then
we don't even get in ferocious debates or anything.
No,
we're really civil with each other.
We just accept it. It's just who we are. But yeah, but then with the movement stuff, what's been interesting is like, you know, I started researching break falling, like noticing that my students were not comfortable falling down the same way that some of the experienced parkour athletes were. So I went and read break falling stuff from gymnastics and circus and started playing with all these things. And then I run into you and you're super excited about Parkour Ukemi. So let's start with there. What is Parkour Ukemi? I know you just released a a program on it. So what does that mean to you, and how did you go into that?
Yeah, I named it that pretty much as a nod of gratitude to the two biggest sources of my inspiration. You said you were looking into circus and gymnastics. At that time, I had been doing a lot of martial arts. And in those early days, you can probably relate to this, but when we were all watching YouTube and just trying stuff, people were getting nasty injuries and taking really bad falls. And I remember I was the only person in the community that wasn't getting hurt. And one day it really clicked when I had a really bad fall that I came out of completely okay. I realized, whoa, like my martial arts background is keeping me safe through this practice. And so it seems so simple, right? But you probably remember back in those days, I think I did a seminar in 2010 on this topic at Parkour Visions. And I almost had to convince people that we need to do this. Now it's a no-brainer, of course, and I can move on to other things. But that first seminar, like people weren't on board, which is hilarious. But once I realized how impactful it was on my training, I just started going to town, putting stuff in the lab, trying new things. I discovered that a lot of stuff I learned from martial arts had a lot of bad habits involved with it, because now we're on concrete, we're around complex shapes, so these techniques needed to be changed. So yeah, I just started piecing drills and methods and techniques together. And because parkour, the training on hard surfaces and complex shapes, mixed with my background in martial arts, where the term Ukemi comes from, which is, it's not just the art of falling in martial arts, it also involves getting a realistic attack. But because most falling practice falls under the banner of Ukemi, I adopted that term to give a nod of gratitude. So yeah, I mashed those two together basically to make the statement, hey, this is a new practice. In a lot of these other things like martial arts, gymnastics and such, there are a lot of bad habits. And in parkour, this is a very demanding practice when it comes to falling, because we're doing high speeds, hard surfaces, complex shapes. So yeah, I felt like it was a new project to undertake and called it that.
Sweet. Let me back up there for a second. That's what you said. It was interesting. You said that you had some resistance from the community when you started trying to teach people about falling specifically. Why do you think people might have been resistant to that?
I don't know. I think in my experience, a lot of movement communities treat falling like this thing that we just don't talk about. Like, oh, don't talk about that. Just don't do that. And that's kind of what the attitude was. And so I don't know if it was a lot of resistance as much as it was confusion. Like, should I spend my time doing that? I'm not sure. So maybe more so that.
Yeah, I had a strange conversation with a friend who's really into, like, came from a strength and conditioning perspective, and he was all about, like, you never fail a rep. And he was like taking that perspective into the world of what we were doing. It's like, you should never train failure. You're teaching yourself to fail.
Yeah.
That was very strange to me at the time, but it really, like, it made me think more and more about that. And I was like, well, no, you have to fail, right? Like, what I tell people is that when you learn to fall with grace, then you can fly without fear. And the more that you have that sense that you can buffer the impacts of a landing, of something going not according to plan, the more reckless you can be with your practice, the more uninhibited you can be.
Yeah. The way I see it is that if you're familiar with the term deep learning, being able to reach far beyond your present skill set, that's what allows you to do in a physical practice. If you do that, you're risking injury, you're risking falling. And it allows you just to be a little bit more careless and try things that are beyond what you're able to do. And I think spikes your learning curve for that reason.
Yeah.
Actually, I think you pointed out why there was a little bit of resistance. And that's something I do recall, is people saying you shouldn't practice the wrong way. So yeah, my opinion on that is absolutely 90% of your training shouldn't be falling, or, I mean, depending on what you're doing. But my whole position is at least, like, integrate some of this stuff into your warm-ups, or a practice session here and there. Getting down a new falling technique is really powerful. It's not going to change, if you get 100 perfect precisions and you practice maybe 10 slip outs from those precisions, like, it's not going to affect your precision. You're going to be fine. So Yeah.
It's interesting. You mentioned the term black swan in our kind of like preamble when we were chatting before we got started here. And one of Nassim Taleb, who came up with that term, one of his terms is antifragility. And I really like that term. In his book, Antifragility, he talks about the idea that failure is information. And that if you have any organic system and you're not exposing it to failure frequently enough, it's actually becoming more fragile. So like, I talk about this idea of danger versus risk, right? Danger is what might happen if something went wrong, how bad it could be. And risk is the likelihood that something's going to go wrong. And I intentionally practice in ways where I'm going to fail, where the danger is low. Like I do high risk stuff when danger is low, so that my body has a lot of ability to react and knows exactly what's going to happen if something goes wrong.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what I spend a lot of time doing. And then in those moments, like you were telling me in our pre-talk, when you do that really high precision, you know, up in the trees or something, you're so much more, you're not as stiff, and you're more present. You're less likely to make mistakes. Interestingly, when you practice failure more often, you fail less, in my experience and with my students.
Yeah, because you've mapped out, right? You've mapped out where that parameter space is of all the things that could happen. One idea I've been playing with a lot recently is this idea of degrees of freedom, which is something that comes from Nikolai Bernstein. But if you think about controlling the movement, there's all these areas of things that you don't want to have happen, or things that are going to take you away from the way that you want the movement to happen. But then there are things that are redundant, degrees of freedom that are redundant, that achieve the same end. So you want to find all the variation that allows you to succeed. And then you also want to be able to control you want to be able to bias towards the variations that are not going to have bad consequences. So when you see someone jump to a precision where like one side is a very far fall down, but the other side's safe, you know, basically as long as they're between landing precisely and falling off on the safe side, they're okay.
Right.
And so I think part of what we do as we're really cultivating the higher level of this practice is we start visualizing all of the ways in which we could have control of the situation, even if the ideal doesn't happen.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting because up until now, and I don't know how this is in some of the communities you frequent, but in parkour, a lot of people, even though they got out of this phase of being resistant, it seemed like a lot of them were just of the opinion, like, I don't really need to train that stuff because I've been fine so far. You know, you'll have these really advanced athletes say, hey, I made it this far. But the way I see it is that it's just a process of natural selection, unfortunately, where, you know, for every person who has like had a, you know, a reasonable amount of maybe luck coming out of these nasty falls, there's like 10 other people that don't even do parkour anymore, unfortunately. And so that's what it's about, is practicing in these ways so that you can kind of get outside the pool of natural selection and like protect your career or protect your body, you know, things that are important to you.
How do you buffer failure is how I like to think of it, right? Or how do you more robust the bad things that can happen?
Yeah.
I think that practice is really powerful. And I use you as an example in my seminars, because the thing that was really interesting to me is, you know, around the last time we were training together, you were doing a lot of competitions and you were performing really well in the competitions, but like on a skill for skill, power for power level, you often weren't quite as impressive as some of the athletes that you were on the podium with, right?
Yeah, I had to be creative.
So like, you know, you'd be right up there with Dylan Baker, right? He's a good friend of ours, and I'm pretty sure Dylan's standing broad jumps like a foot further than yours. Am I correct?
Oh, probably 5. I don't know.
And you know,
he
guys
do everything better than me.
Faster climb ups, you know, faster at running. If we just asked them to run in a straight line, could do a bigger Kong precision. Yeah, just asked them to do it in things. But what it seemed like to me is when I watched you run, you could run at 80% of your top speed and 80% of your power through a really complex course, where a lot of people were maybe operating at 60%. So even though they had a higher ceiling, they couldn't reach it because they had to they had to hold themselves back more from the fear of falling. And the fact that you were so unafraid of falling allowed you to operate with a lot less brake on, basically.
Yeah. When you run an obstacle course, often you're judging probabilities of success on a certain technique and how you might combo that into a next. And yeah, I see that a lot when people are scared to fall, especially with little prep time before an obstacle course. They take the easier road because there's so much uncertainty there. Yeah. And as you buffer your ability to fail, you get to this point where you can make it ups your probability of success in those situations. Because you're not worried about little things that can happen. So yeah, definitely. It's a good observation.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful thing for people to realize, you know, if you don't expose yourself to failure, you know, in parkour, in life, etc., then, and you don't become robust to it, then you can't operate as uninhibitedly as you could. And when you're free, when you're really free to move, when you're free to do whatever, it's massively powerful.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about the efficiency of it, you spiking your learning curve, things like that. But I think my favorite thing about that perspective is just how it changes the attitude in training sessions. Also, back when we first started, things were really, because people were just watching YouTube videos and they were having nasty falls, things were very tense, at least in my community. Yeah. I remember just feeling a lot of fear and pushing through. And, you know, my first Kong to Cat, where you vault over a wall and you land on the face of another wall. Sorry, I'm not telling you that. That's for any audience members that don't know what that is. My first one of those, I remember it took me 30 minutes to build up to that and try a bunch of times and back out, hesitate, super stiff. And I just don't like that experience. And after putting a lot of time into studying falling, my training session is more laughing and joking around with your friends, like trying something you know you can't do just to make a joke out of it. And, you know, even when I'm trying something intense, it's more of a place of calmness and less a place of like anger or tense fear, things like that. So I think that's another huge benefit, is just your experience of movement becomes lighter, a better vibe.
Absolutely. Have you noticed that sometimes when you have a fall and you don't get hurt, it automatically sort of lightens you? It's like, oh, the bad thing happened and it wasn't that bad. And now I can let go of some of my inhibitions.
You know, that's funny. I haven't felt that in a long time, because now it's of course to me, but I still see that in my students. I still see that moment where it was really hard for them to do something. The falling technique that we had, you know, put a lot of repetition into came through just like I said it would. And then after they got that out of the way, exactly that, they're just like, oh, that's the worst that can happen and I can deal with that. Perfect. And then they usually nail it the next time. But at this point when I fall, I don't think about that stuff at all. I'm just like, of course. Maybe I'll laugh if it was a funny fall, or I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. That's cool. So then, I want to get into the mindset stuff. Let's hold that for a second. And I wanted to ask you, you said something earlier about the bad habits that martial arts have developed. I'm interested to hear you expand on how you've taken the falls from that you learned in the martial arts community and then adapted it and expanded on it in kind of your model of how someone should train falling when they're in these complex and hard environments.
Yeah. So trying to stir up some drama. All right. I see. When I first started martial arts, I started in Aikido, and that's where a majority of the falling technique I learned is from. And there are variations, as an example, of entering the forward roll with starting on your wrist and then making a half circle all the way around to your opposite hip, going across the spine. Some people scoop the arm through, what I've found over the years is that when you're dealing with hard surfaces, there's just no room for error when it comes to striking your AC joint on the top of your shoulder on hard surfaces in a high-speed roll. So not only have I just had a bunch of stories of people learning the roll who have broken collarbones or separated AC joints because of that technique, but also if you look at so you're one of them, interesting. And then also with slick surfaces, sometimes that scoop is just not very precise. Your hand could slip out. So one of the early things that I found is that With the forward roll, it's best to use both hands, as much muscle in both your arms as possible to guide the ground over your shoulder to your back. That's something that, you know, a lot of people come from martial arts really struggle to break those habits. It's like just so ingrained. So that's one of the big ones for sure. Also break falling. I know this maybe is a point of contention between the two of us, but I find that a lot of martial artists have break fall form that's more geared towards mats, like for instance, falling flat back.
Yeah.
And when you get out of the dojo, when you get outside to hard surfaces and complex shapes, you have to deal with strike points, certain bones on your body. You also have to deal with striking a hierarchy of priorities when it comes to protecting things like your head, neck, spine. And so I have not been able to find a good reason why you should go straight to your back, because any sort of protrusions, like let's say there's just a little root on the ground, you just went straight spine into that root. Whereas if you're on your side, on the meaty part, the soft tissue pathway of a break fall, you know, maybe that root's still probably going to hurt, but you're protecting the vitals. So yeah, there's some different things like that. And then also, you know, being on mats in a dojo can give you some funny habits, like purposely slapping the mat, which in some cases on mats, that can maybe dissipate some of those forces, but it becomes almost excessive, and you'd never want to actually do that on concrete or packed dirt or rocks or whatever. So there's just a bunch of various stuff like that, where we have to start to change the form in order to deal with strike points and some of the real shapes you'll find outside in the real world. Yeah, actually,
perhaps my stuff is updated since the last time we chatted, but I also don't like to have people drill going to the flat back.
Cool.
Always try to get people on their side, and
Nice.
For the same reason, because that margin of error for protecting your central nervous system is just so much smaller when you're potentially rolling your head back. Like trying to control your head going here is so much harder than pillowing on your shoulder.
Yep, that's another reason for sure. You got that shoulder helmet.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience with that recently. I don't know if you've noticed this, but so I always teach people to keep, or I've traditionally taught people to keep their hand below 45 degrees on a break fall, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to up by their head here, because I found that
below 45.
Yeah, because I found that the shoulder, like I feel like I could dislocate my shoulder if my hand's up here. Mm-hmm. What I found was that that's kind of specific to having broad shoulders, and that for female students, they can't get a cushion to protect their head unless their arm is much higher relatively. And then at the same time, they're much less at risk of dislocating the shoulder by being in that position, because the shoulders are so much narrower. I was curious if you noticed that as well.
I actually don't. I almost don't teach anyone to get up towards 90 degrees. Yeah. I actually say you shouldn't go above 90 degrees for the reason that you said. Mm-hmm. But the head helmet there, the shoulder helmet or the hand helmet, things like that, that's super advanced. I've seen people fall from 10 feet to break falls and still have the strength for their head not to whiplash. And this side position is also very controlled because you're tucking your chin kind of down to the side, as opposed to that straight flat back where you can whiplash back. And so that's only really for people who are training at heights that need to know, if for some reason your last resort ends up being the break fall, it's a hierarchy, and your priority is your head. So then maybe go a little higher with the arm, and then so that you can use that. But for most people, I say kind of down in between 90 degrees and 30 degrees is where your arm should be, because you don't need to worry about your head.
Interesting.
But because I don't have a ton of advanced students needing to practice the shoulder helmet, or the arm helmet, or whatever, I haven't noticed patterns as you've just described. No.
Yeah, it was an interesting discovery for me. So something to play with.
Yeah.
The other martial arts habit that really, I think, doesn't translate well to our environment is the driving the heel up on the roll. So when you roll and you split your legs and drive one leg high, have you noticed that we're working with martial artists?
So this is a split step entrance to the forward roll. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do see a lot of that in martial arts, and especially when we're talking about a situation where you're actually using a fall. Mm-hmm. That's maybe not so important, but I do see some value in that. when it comes to the assisted dive roll.
Okay.
So for anyone who isn't familiar with that term, assisted dive roll is a situation where your hips and head height are level. And if you tried to dive roll, your upper body would come below your lower body, and this is called a suitcase. And so your body just gets sandwiched, and it's really, really dangerous and painful. So in those situations, because your hips aren't high enough for a dive roll, you just throw one leg down to the ground, not to land on one leg, but in order to pop your hips up, to guide your hips to the correct height for a dive roll. That's why it's called assisted dive roll. And in that situation, one of the worst things you can do is actually not drive your heel. The heel drive facilitates the right rotation direction, whereas if you let your leg drop down after one leg has gone to the ground, it's actually fighting the direction you want to go, and could make the roll more difficult, cause you to land on top of your shoulder, whatever. So I would say in some cases, yes, it's not a good practice for them just to be doing that on flat ground. But once they get up to the assisted dive roll heights, then yeah, it's ideal to drive your heel. So I haven't seen too much of that.
I noticed that when we're diving through things, the big danger is clipping your heel on the top. And if someone has habitually driven the heel up, then they're going to be, putting themselves in danger, because they're increasing that size of their body as it's moving through the object.
Yeah, totally. The ultimate is to be able to control the height of the hips, and then be able to put your body in whatever position you want.
And the feet relative to the hips, right?
Yeah, because you can use that heel as kind of like an engine for how high you want to put your hips, and then to be able to dial that back and like have some low-lying obstacle so that you can bring it back down is important. But I guess I haven't seen too many bad habits to where I've seen people clipping feet just yet, but I could see that, because often, in a dojo with no obstacles, flat ground, you can get away with some crazy stuff, swinging your feet up really high and unnecessary break falls and whatnot, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. So, and the other one I wanted to talk to you about that I was curious about as far as break falls is the use of the hand, right? You talked about the slap. So I remember thinking about this a lot, because I came from a martial arts background as well. And, there's this idea that basically as the body impacts, the hand slaps, or even the hand slaps at the end of the impact. And so, you introduced me to this physics of falling idea, right? That the impact is the wounding energy of the impact is proportional to the area and time over which it's distributed. It's a really useful concept. I always demonstrated it by punching people, right, versus pushing them. You can see the penetration and the abrupt nature of it versus a more prolonged push.
That's so your style of showing that.
So anyways, I'm curious for you how you like the hand to interact with the ground.
Yeah, so there are also a lot of variations there as well. If it's a low impact fall, I find that the arm can play a really interesting role as antenna. So as long as you're not posting out or bending this arm behind you, which is pretty much the first things you're trying to get out of a student's muscle memory right off the bat, as long as they're out here but coming back, you can kind of feel the ground before you hit, and that can help you adjust your body and let your arm slide out or get out of there. And I find that pretty valuable in some cases. For me, I've definitely used that. I just saw actually 3 days ago a student in my gym use that. They fell from one of our advanced students fell from about 6 feet, and he put his arm behind him, and while he was in the air, everything slowed down for me, and I was just like, oh no, don't leave the arm there. That's not going to be good. But he did it just enough at an angle to where he could kind of feel the ground, because he couldn't really see the ground. And so he just touched the ground, got his arm out, and it ended up being completely fine. So in some cases, I use it as an antenna. In other cases, if you're looking for maximum surface area, then yes, you're looking for good timing where your entire body hits at the same time. And actually what you'll find is the hand will bounce off the ground. And this is natural. You shouldn't be trying to keep your arm on the ground. If you watch a lot of break falls in slow motion on concrete or hard surfaces, the hand will bounce, and that's natural to let the energy keep moving more time. But it's not a slap. It's not a deliberate smack. So those are two of the major ways that I kind of see the arm playing a role. see if there's anything else. There is this one break fall that is incredibly soft, where depending on your orientation, you can kind of reach around and grab I would use the word grab the ground before your body hits. And if you have the strength, you can slow down the fall before your body hits and land actually very softly. But that's some pretty advanced stuff.
Yeah, I think
that would be the third way I would say, is also actually slowing your fall down.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get into really advanced break falls, you start to essentially move into the territory of acrobatics, where you can cartwheel off things, you can flip off things, you can handspring off things in order to control and get your weight back underneath you. There's a great, the Georgian cat, I can't remember his name, but look up the Georgian cat. He's a judo player who's famous for basically doing cartwheels or flips off of people's throws and landing back.
Yeah. Actually, that's interesting. This is a new thing I included in the online course that you mentioned I just released. Is I've always seen, when you look at the physics of falling, I've seen some acrobatic skills as absolutely valuable for creating more time or more surface area. Yeah. And one of the biggest ones is what I call parkour auzinho. And the word auzinho comes from capoeira, which is kind of like a mini cartwheel. Okay. And what I've found is that a very common falling scenario, not only for my own experience, but I'm seeing show up in a lot of videos and in my students, are these situations where you need to fall, but there's an obstacle in your fall zone. And one of the best things you can do is get your hips up and over the thing, depending on how high it is. And that usually involves some variation of a hip height in a cartwheel. Yeah. Like you mentioned. And so I got pretty into finding out what all of these little, capoeira or breaking and different acrobatic movements that you can use and what's their place in falling. And I had a pretty big breakthrough where I realized that a lot of this stuff where you wouldn't want to use it in a high impact fall, the butt roll, for example. Butt roll is just a little roll across your butt cheeks. Yeah. You wouldn't want to do that in a high impact fall, but when maybe you barely trip or you're being lazy or you're just in kind of like a weird orientation, you can use that instead. And so I realized that my idea of all these different, and I haven't talked about this yet on here, but all these different continuums of falling techniques that link together, they are altered by the speed or the impact level in which you enter the fall. And so whereas one continuum might be a lot of rolls for higher speed falls, I realized that there are a lot of little acrobatic movements like cartwheels and kind of similar things to makakos and such, that link together in a similar fashion for low impact falls. And I included that in the course as well, just because for beginners, I think it's very valuable to develop a relationship with the ground and be able to enter and exit the ground in a ton of different possible ways in order to buffer for failure and have lots of options.
Yeah, I think options is key. Actually, when you were talking about kicking the heel up, it reminded me of that. I think one of the big mistakes that I personally made, I think a lot of us made, was starting to sort of bifurcate everything into the right way and the wrong way to do things, rather than like the contextual way that works right here. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like heel drive is bad when you're diving through an object. It's good when you're doing a recovered dive roll, right?
Right.
It's like if I want to do a really quick flip, front flip on flat ground with nothing around me, driving my heel up can be really fast and quick. If I want to go over something, a strong heel drive can drive my head down towards the thing that I'm trying to get away from.
Yeah.
Same kind of idea of contextual movement.
Yeah.
So that's just an interesting thing to play with. Yeah. I feel like we could dive really deep into this break falling stuff, but I think it'd work a lot better if we were actually able to be in person and demonstrate some of this, because all these details make sense to us, but the audience is probably saying,
right.
What the hell is going on? So,
yeah, I've actually never described my unifying theory of Ukemi without some sort of like visuals, at least I could point out the height of the hips and the head and whatnot. And I find it to be really difficult to do with words for sure.
Yeah. So we'll have to get together and maybe do that sometime. That'd be fun. So, okay, let's, what I wanted to ask you, let's go broader and more philosophical for a second. I know you have a view about movement that's connected to kind of your life your life philosophy as well, right? You know, checking out Amos.com, we've got information technology next to Randori and Ukemi. So what is it that really is the central why of your practice? Like, what motivates you to continue these practices? And what do you think the real aim to be aimed at is?
Yeah, I've noticed parkour gets me a lot of attention from girls, and that's about it, I guess. That's, same for you, right?
Well, that's just evolutionary biology, right? It's spreading the genes. I'm pretty sure I'm doing a better job, though. You keep practicing, but you just haven't succeeded
yet. Are you referring to an article I wrote quite a few years ago on movement science? And is that what you're asking about?
Not particularly, but this is a central question for me. Everything in my own life is about the why of movement practice, and I know that that's something I've thought about a lot as well. And so, just curious to hear where you're coming from.
I think a lot of the why for me even originates in my discovery of parkour and what I was doing with my life at that time, and that is when I was studying Aikikai Aikido. I just found that I had this conviction for harmony with my surroundings, whether that be an attacker or problems in my life. I just always wanted to be able to not be clumsily stumbling through my existence, but actually be connected and have a strong relationship with objective reality. And I think when I found out what parkour was, I realized that it's just martial arts without the attacker. It's the same philosophy for me. It's preparation, it's harmony, it's connection. And I think that has stuck with me this entire time. And maybe is the reason why I've never been one of the burnouts. Like, you'll see on Facebook every once in a while, some veteran parkour person just like, yeah, I'm done with parkour, I can't do this anymore. And I've always been perplexed by that. I just don't know what that feels like, because I've always had a fire for movement. And I think it's because, my underlying motivation is just to find this harmony. That probably has informed a lot of my decisions to study falling, because that's part of that idea of harmony for me, is to be able to be elegant when I slip on ice or fall off my bicycle or get hit by a train or fall off my motorcycle. I want to be able to deal with the things that are going to happen in life in an elegant way. So I guess that's maybe in a nutshell what motivates me.
It's almost, one way to describe that might be that it's a practice of being able to take on hard things and make them effortless or graceful. Yeah,
that's part of it. That's part of it, for sure.
The way that the terminology of like harmony, I'm not sure that maps right to something that fits in my little cognitive system, right? So I'm curious. And when you talk about martial arts, like I come from Muay Thai, and I don't think Muay Thai, at least as it's been experienced in the West, has a philosophy like Aikido, right? They're quite different. I think martial arts are very diverse philosophically. And this is an interesting question for me, because people in the beginning, you remember the forum era of parkour, people talked a lot about the philosophy. I heard Julie Angel say recently, parkour is a philosophy with a physical practice. But I feel like nobody's ever been very good at articulating what that philosophy actually is. It's an embodied philosophy. It's not an abstracted philosophy at this stage.
Yeah, it is kind of sad that you don't see as much talk on that subject within the parkour community anymore. But I think part of it is that there can be a lot of different reasons for doing this, and a lot of different philosophies that will produce a lot of different movement styles. And I guess if I were to look at Muay Thai, so I did Muay Thai for a while as well, which is to me like less a harmony. For me, like if I could choose of any altercation, I would want it to happen in a way that was, like you said, effortless, to defend myself effortless, and with as little energy as possible, as little impact as possible, and also protecting my attacker. Ideally, I would like that. But there are times where you have to find a solution on the other side of the spectrum, and maybe use something that's a little more brute force. But I guess my goals are leaning towards the harmony and the more like effortless solutions, whether that's an attacker or whether that's, tripping up the stairs, or, some bicyclist just flies out in front of me, just the things that happen in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what I mean by that harmony, is when bringing in Aikido and Muay Thai and comparing them is, ideally, I like this solution where it seems like more mastery to me to be able to do it like water, as opposed to like brute force.
Mm-hmm. But water can flow and water can crash. Right? Both.
Yeah.
For sure. The way that I've been thinking about this stuff recently is, I've been very influenced by Jordan Peterson and Nassim Taleb, and then that's led me down the road of reading like Nikolai Bernstein and some of the stuff on motor learning theory and all of it, and John Boyd from, are you familiar with John Boyd's OODA loop and some of the things from John Boyd? All this stuff to me, it's like essentially about this idea that essentially human beings can either we can develop ourselves more, or we can atrophy. Like there's no stasis. You're either growing or you're atrophying. And within that, you need some combination of nurturing, let's say, and of challenge. Right? You need to push yourself to your edge, but not so far to your edge that you're constantly being overwhelmed. Right? You're anti-fragile, but only to a degree. You become more anti-fragile by taking on enough stress. Or like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow. Flow is the point where you're under high challenge combined with high competence.
I could use a little atrophy in my life. I've been going hard.
Slowing down. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm pretty good at the yang style of practicing, right? Like lately I've been thinking, how do I create more of some more yin practices to balance it? Especially when I was just in Europe and doing all these crazy jumps. I came back and I was like, I don't know how to treat myself nicely. Like, what does that look like? So I'm trying to I've got my bone broth right here. I just got that done. I've got Epsom salt baths, like just little things, little rituals that I can start bringing in that can bring me into that more yin state.
Yeah. What would you say? You said that you just went on this high-level performance spree. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like you haven't been doing so much to treat your body and really focus on the recovery aspects. You've just been going hard. Yeah. What would you say is one of the elements that was a driver of that, allowed you to sustain that for a long period of time and have that success?
I'm not quite sure. There's been a few things that have been going on with me because I had chronic fatigue issues and IBS.
I remember that.
Yeah. And that, so basically eating food and eating plenty of carbohydrates and doing bone broth over the last few winters and meditation to heal my gut all helped. And a little, just different things to try and get my gut healed has really helped. Yeah. Once my digestion was really in better order, it's like, that's the center of nourishing yourself, right? Food nourishes you. And if your body doesn't digest it well, it's really hard for you to recover. So I think that's slowly been coming back online, and my body's slowly been kind of saying, okay, cool. You're feeding me now. I can let you have some of this stuff that you've been striving for a long time.
Nice. Good, man.
So that's been cool. Yeah. I'll probably do a little kind of solo podcast about that, because I want to make this more about the guests, but that's what's been going on.
Nice.
So yeah. So now still trying to get smarter about that stuff coming home.
Yeah. That's the backbone of all this stuff. I've had a similar experience. I remember hitting a wall at the age of like 28 or so, touring with a van full of parkour people that would just go hard for 6 days a week. Yeah. And that's when I realized I just could not keep that rhythm. But since then, tons of experimentation with my diet and finding out what's optimal for me has allowed me to really turn that upside down and find those high level performance strides as well.
What's been the big things that have helped you with your diet?
For me, it's avoiding at all costs all the fad diet stuff in media and conducting science on yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
Because they're just, nutrition is a young science. It's incredibly complicated. And, you know, you might be able to glean like a 2% upgrade out of like something somebody wrote that you read online, but you're going to make much bigger strides if you just conduct good science on yourself. And so I'm a huge advocate of, you know, journaling and meticulously tracking a lot of your experience while experimenting with different sorts of diets. And that has been huge for me, definitely.
Cool. Yeah, I think a lot of people like to get excited. This is my own experience. You get excited about the potential to make a change, and you don't have any patience to do it. So you jump in and you throw everything about some new approach at yourself, and often you have like some nice results right away, but often there's a flip side. I went, let's say, paleo, low carb, intermittent fasting, and with calorie restriction in 2010, beginning of 2009, 2010. I cut 20 pounds off. It was great. And then over the course of the next year, I had thyroid problems. My body was cold all the time. I tore ligaments in both of my feet.
Your Achilles, right?
Yeah, that's the end of the story. Subluxated my feet. Had a panic attack during the first competition and had 2 back spasms. And then I started to heal from all of that. And then at the end of it, I tore my Achilles tendon.
Okay.
So all those strategies are useful for the right person at the right time, but too much of them, plus too much stress, plus too much things will take your body apart. And so I think that what's really important for people is to get that baseline, you know, how does my body feel? What am I actually doing? What's going into my body right now? And then change one thing.
That's really hard to do. Like you said, that takes a lot of patience, and you have to be dedicated, because especially at first, if you have low energy and low motivation and you just want to give up so easily, you have to push through and isolate certain things. You can't, if you just overhaul your diet and you make all these changes, not only is that going to be hard to keep, but you can't be scientific about the results. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate of just slow little changes. It took me maybe 5 years. I didn't really know what I was doing. I definitely made a lot of mistakes and failed a lot of diets, but it took me 5 years to really dial in what I consider my optimal diet. So yeah, it's important. It takes a lot of patience though.
Just my little thing, if there's one change that most people could make, that'd be really, relatively simple and that will help almost everyone's health. It's just don't drink soft drinks.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's a good start. Good start for sure.
That's just junk that's going into your body. And it's a very simple change. It's a one thing change, but sometimes people are getting 400, 500 calories a day from food, from something that's extraordinarily acidic. You put your tooth in Coca-Cola and it'll dissolve overnight.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's enough on diet.
Do you talk about diet a lot on here?
I don't.
On this podcast?
Well, actually, no. I have had Stefan Guillen on, who's an expert in neurobiology and the obesity epidemic and why people overeat. And so we had a long conversation about that and how it impacted a lot of other things about understanding human motivation.
Nice.
But other than that, yeah, it's not one of my primary topics. So I wanted to ask you, in addition to being a parkour athlete, you have a long-term martial arts background. I know you also picked up dance. I actually had one of your dance instructors at Return to the Source this year, Alex.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Alex.
Alex is a good guy.
I love Alex, yeah.
And so I'm wondering how you look at parkour in relationship to a broader movement practice and how that broader movement practice informs the way you do parkour, how those two things interrelate for you, or how they interact with this broader philosophy of what movement is for you, how that connects to life.
Yeah, I think for me, I have trouble drawing lines between all this stuff. It always actually seemed odd to me to use the word parkour, just because it felt like it really was a part of my identity. in so many ways. And with martial arts, like I already explained, the same philosophy of harmony with my surroundings is applied through parkour and martial arts. And so dance is the same thing. It's just more for me, an expression, a creativity, less preparation, more fun. And I don't see any sort of line between dance and parkour, for example, or dance and martial arts even. And I think that's actually a really untapped area that I've tried to play with, but I've been so strapped down with responsibilities over the last few years. But I would love to just see dance become more three-dimensional, and get up off the flat ground. And so there have been a couple times where I've had a little bit of time to play with that and just like try to choreograph some stuff amidst like a really complex array of obstacles. And yeah, ultimately I just find that movement in general is this magic pill that, we were talking about diet a little bit, but also exercise is free. And if you just move your body a little bit each day, that's insane the impact it can have on your life and your mental health, so many things. And so the way I want to approach that is I don't want to do things that are boring, that are easy to make excuses to do. I want to do things that are like, I can't wait to go to dance class. I can't wait to go downtown with my friends and climb on some stuff. I can't wait to go learn a new movement from ninjutsu or whatever. That's the sort of direction I want my movement to go, is stuff that I can't wait to do. I'm really excited to. And it's even better when all those things enhance each other. So some of the balance or even some of the falling positions or some of the connections I get to the ground through dance inform my training of Parkour Ukemi and my training of parkour. And the agility and the roots that I put through the ground learning parkour and what that gives me there translates into martial arts, where I have better center of balance and I can move better. So I guess that's kind of my overview look of all these things and their roles they play in my life, is their connectedness and the value of just being fun.
I remember in the early days of the parkour community, there was this question, is parkour a martial art? And I ran into this concept of fuzzy sets, which I liked as a kind of as a way of thinking about these things. So a fuzzy set is a set that's defined by what's at the center of the set, not by where the edges of the set are, and the edges of the set overlap, right? So you can imagine that, I'll write a little thing here. You could have martial arts, parkour, and dance, and they could look like, can we see that? Three discrete bubbles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you could imagine that they're, like some sort of Venn diagram where the bubbles all overlap. And so I think of parkour, let's say, as really, I think if you overlap the whole parkour community, you try to describe it not by the original intention or anything, but just what people are actually doing. It's just playing with obstacles or playing in three-dimensional space, right? It's movement on obstacles. And then you could say martial arts, to me, traditionally is something that is relevant to performance around combat or fighting or martial arts, right? Or military engagement. And dance is, dance is hard, but I generally think of it as movement with music, but people can dance without music. So you could say it's expressive movement. It's movement that's about self-expression, let's say. And then you could see that, clearly being able to move over obstacles effectively has martial implications, but not everything that we do in parkour is about martial implications. So it is both a martial art and not a martial art. And in the same way, absolutely parkour is self-expressive, right? And you can do it and perform it with music. And then when you connect it to music, you connect it to the aesthetic aspects of dance, I think that gets really interesting. Or with partnering, right?
Yeah.
Partnering gets very, very fun and interesting. So at our sessions, like yesterday, I trained with my senior student, Robert, and we did some contact improv dancing. We did some light kickboxing sparring. We did some pad work, some Muay Thai pad work, and then we did a bunch of parkour. And we also played with balls and did a bunch of shit, right?
Sounds like a good day.
Yeah, that's sort of a typical training session for us. But what we found is, there's these really interesting interplays between them. Like when I train with martial artists, they're always surprised by my ability to take space, right? Because the explosiveness and the imagination that I have for space that comes from parkour,
Mhm.
it allows, it allows me to move in ways that are unexpected for a martial
Yeah,
art, because I
exactly.
cultivated that same elasticity. And then what I found with dance is that as a means to understand rhythm and connection to the environment and exploration of the environment, it's extraordinary. And to get people out of one of my big criticisms of the parkour community is that we spend too much time in the volitional mind, right? And this is something that I think connects to your work around Parkour Randori, and we'll have to dig deep into that. But there's this distinction between volitional and reflexive. Volitional is movement where you decide exactly what you're going to do. So like, I'm going to do a round off back handspring backflip. That's a volitional sequence, right? This guy is kicking at my head and I'm going to duck under it is a reflexive sequence, right? One of the big problems in teaching people falls is generally, most people teach volitional falling when falls are by definition reflexive, and you have to make that gap.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've been talking for a while, but I wanted to tell you the story because I thought it was really interesting. This year I was teaching with my friend Simon Thacker in Australia, and he, just by a weird coincidence, he ended up introducing a lot of like the basic material for how to start overcoming obstacles that I would use. And so I was like, these people weren't quite ready maybe for some of my advanced material, but I didn't know how to get an entry point for them. But what I've been doing a lot in my own practice is basically turning on music and moving to the beat and thinking of dance as basically just weight transfers with beat, or weight transfers in relationship to music. And then how do I transfer my weight in a more three-dimensional space, right? Is where I'm incorporating the parkour. And I found that taps into some really interesting mental spaces. But I never felt comfortable teaching it because I have very little dance background. But I was like, well, I'm just going to throw this at these students. And so I had to like borrow somebody else's music and player, and got this going. And it was like magic happened. Like these people were tapping into the ability to control complex movements and generating patterns that are really hard to teach people to do. And there was a few women in particular who came up to me afterwards and said they're very intimidated by the idea of trying parkour, but as soon as it's framed as a type of dance, they were able to just fall in love with moving through an obstacle course.
Nice.
And so yeah, that was a really interesting experience. And so I wanted to just share that with you because I thought it would be interesting to you. But I see the same connection that you're seeing there between these things, and you can play with them. And I think it's funny because I've gone and called myself something, given myself another name, a new box to play in. Whereas you're really in some ways still playing with all the same themes, but just holding within the parkour. So how have you? Tell me more about what have you seen that dance gives you in parkour? Have you been able to incorporate it with your students?
Yeah, actually, I will sometimes do a dance warm up. I'll throw on some music and really expose, a lot of advanced parkour people who think they're so good with their bodies. I'll show them, they still have a lot to learn. They'll look so goofy trying to do certain dances. But, in our coaching certifications, I'll often teach that. But
I remember.
Yeah.
I got to just say, I remember at the when I did your certification, you guys had Marlo Fiskin teach us twerking.
Oh my God, yes.
That was a good time. If anyone doesn't know who Marlo is, we'll try to get her on this podcast too. She's awesome. But go ahead, more on dance.
Yeah. So yeah, if you can't twerk, then your parkour skills need some work. It's basically what we were saying with that. Like you need to be able to move your body in all situations.
Yeah,
that's basically it for me with dance. Is I feel like I learned more positions and that my body can make, giving me more tools, more options, and that it has informed my falling skills. It's allowed me to be more creative and maybe with like an odd shape or a weird obstacle. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I know this dance move that fits here. And so, yeah. And also I think parkour, my form of parkour, which is I like to haul ass. I like to, go really fast, has caused me over the years to be a little bit stiffer, which might be a good thing when you're trying to transfer momentum and be really fast. But when it comes to dance, like I find myself very limited. And so now dance is helping me expand my mobility, which definitely plays a role in parkour as well. So yeah, that's kind of what dance offers for me at this point, to parkour at least.
Yeah. That's interesting. One thing I've noticed is martial artists and parkour athletes tend to become very kyphotic and internally rotated in the shoulders. And I think it's well, you know, that's a defensive position, right? I think it's also a defensive position relative to like big, scary concrete blocks approaching you at high speed. I think there's a tendency to want to sort of take all the vulnerable parts of the body and get them kind of collapsed into the, away from, you know, covered by the big parts of the body, but we lose some ease and we lose the ability to be as relaxed and then as powerful as possible when we're always in that habitual posture. So I often talk to parkour athletes or guys who I see come from the martial arts background, especially the parkour, and say, like, you know, try to move like a dancer. Move like a dancer. And I think going and taking some dance and just learning to release, there's something really safe about like playing with the floor.
Yeah. Actually, with just human speeds, this is something that I've started to notice that is almost a little scary, but I'm really excited for this, is that it's just human created speeds. So no 2-story drops, no bicycles involved, just the human body on flat ground. I'm starting to see glimpses of the ability to be completely invincible. And I never thought I would have used the word invincible. Like early in parkour, you know, we didn't want to encourage people to ever think that way, because then you'd get hurt. But some of my advanced kids that I've been teaching for many years now, you could almost like a cat, you could just throw them up in the air and they know how to enter and exit the ground with so many different tools when it comes to falling that they're totally fine. And I've, you know, done drills with them where I try to push them into learning new weird movements and stringing them together. And these guys are insane now. It's almost like you can't hurt them. They're anti-fragile for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, everything is anti-fragile to a point, right? You stick your foot in a hole and it can be a bad day. But
yeah, that's why. Just flat ground, human speeds. There are totally so many other things that could change.
Yeah, but no, I do think that we're barely tapping, right, what humans are capable of.
Oh my God, yeah.
The way that parkour has progressed already, like we couldn't have imagined 5 years ago what people are doing now.
No.
When you look at Jared Nahulu, who's one of your students, I imagine, and Nate Weston and these guys who are, you know, swinging, doing a swing and passing over another bar 8 feet wide, coming down and landing on a precision on the other side on a rail. It's insane. Like we just can't imagine that. And I don't think that that's the end of what's possible, right?
Right.
I think human beings are extraordinarily adaptive creatures, and we're the you know, this generation is the nadir of human physical potential, right? We've gone as far as we can in the direction of decline, and so our baseline of what's possible is so low. What if we cultivated a culture of movement that's as robust as our culture of, you know, computer engineering?
Yeah, I was actually talking with Callum Powell about what we predict. You know, parkour and all these things converging, really, like, again, it's weird to use the term parkour because really it's just a converging of all these different movement practices. Where do we see that going in 5-10 years? And based on what we just experienced over the last decade, I don't think we're going to be able to fathom what people are able to do. But my philosophy is that for this next phase, we will have to depart the natural selection phase. Like we're not going to have anyone 5 stories off the ground striding across the tops of little poles without a strong ability to adapt to almost any situation that could go wrong. And so I think that we're going to see stuff that we can't fathom now, but now falling will be an absolutely necessary part of every person's practice that's going to go into that frontier and explore that. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. I think I like this analogy of mapping things out, mapping all the ways that things can be controlled and learning the control variables. You know,
more and more efficiently allows us to perform and in ways that are unimaginable when you don't understand the higher order variables to control.
Yeah, it's so, you save so much more time if you focus on that in your early training, because think about all the injuries. Like if you were to add up over 10 years of some person's practice, even if it was just 3 major injuries over that 10 years, how much time were they sitting out and then had to work back to their level of ability? How much money did that cost them? Like the huge divots that those injuries can take out of a person's life, when really you can just focus on learning these correct falling techniques and how to adapt to undershooting, overshooting, these things. And my God, like the payback, the ROI on that over 10 years is insane. You're going to be a completely different person, so much stronger, more capable. So that's what I'm excited to see, is our communities really adopt these things for early students.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a good segue now to Randori, right? So
Yeah.
At the beginning of the interview, I was talking about the fact that we seem to study the same things along the same time, right? So
Yeah.
I was studying break falls, you were studying Ukemi, and then I got into this idea of aliveness applied to parkour, right? How do we get out of that volitional movement and into reactive movement that's adaptive to the environment and to other people messing with us? Can you? Okay, you can do a Kong vault. Can you do it when someone's chasing you? Can you do it when you're chasing somebody? Can you do it when the environmental variables change? And that's what I call aliveness from my martial arts school of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from Straight Blast Gym. And then I ran into you, and you had this whole concept of Parkour Randori, which was very similar. And then later we both got into dance around the same time. But let's talk about
what's going on here.
I know, for 2 guys who are so dissimilar.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
So yeah, tell me what Parkour Randori means to you, and kind of where you've gone with that practice, how you see it applying to this broader philosophy of what we should be aimed at in movement practice.
Yeah. I think similarly as you just explained, I noticed when I looked at the parkour community, how people are actually training, even though people would talk about being prepared. Like, I do parkour to be able to jump into an emergency situation. You'd hear a lot of talk, but if you looked at the way a lot of people were training, they were doing maybe isolated techniques, maybe a combo. Maybe they made a mistake halfway through and they would just stop what they're doing and go back to the start. It was very controlled, like you said, volitional movement. They knew what was on the other side of walls. There was no pressure or chaos around them. And I just realized that for all this talk, the training wasn't matching up. And I asked myself the question, where does that rabbit hole go? What if we did actually train to match this talk of being prepared for life's challenges? So through that question, I just started studying, even using myself as a guinea pig in a lot of different ways, which was extremely dangerous. And actually Parkour Ukemi is foundational for this, because when you get into this territory where you're introducing new variables and you're having to make decisions at sprinting speeds on the fly while you're gathering other information, like, that's incredibly dangerous. I don't recommend for anyone who hasn't been doing parkour for a while. But the reason I was able to safely guinea pig myself is because of my ability to fall, because I definitely took some spills during that time. And I started to realize how dangerous it really could be. So through that experience of putting myself through different tests and reading various sources, watching videos, actually studying real emergency situations, I realized that we were neglecting certain things. And what my goal was is to kind of string all those things together, whether it's like specific technique types or drills that can help you develop the reactions that you need. Even just knowing where to look at the right times for gathering information. All these things I tried to tie into a single project where I could teach maybe someone who doesn't have parkour skills, at least some basics, so they can have an idea of what they should integrate in their training at what levels to make it safe. And so I haven't had as much time to put into that as I have Parkour Ukemi. And actually, I should say this as well. Randori is a word from Japanese martial arts as well. Yeah. And the whole concept is that's kind of like the sparring phase of training. You've learned your isolated punches. Maybe you've got some combos under your belt. But now with Randori in an Aikikai Aikido situation, you've got multiple attackers, You don't know what anyone's going to do, and you're just reacting. And so I wanted to once again give a nod to martial arts and my influence through martial arts and call it Parkour Randori, to kind of give this feeling, like you said, of live training. This is almost like the sparring element. You know, you've got the isolated techniques, you've integrated them, but can you really improvise these techniques in complex emergency situations? That's that whole sparring element of training.
Very cool. Yeah, you not having kids, taking certain elements of this a little bit further than me. You're telling me last time we hung out about breaking into nightclubs to test out your work. I think you should
all sorts of things. I mean, it's all for science. This is, you know,
breaking into nightclubs for science.
Yeah, I wouldn't do any of this stuff unless it was. But yeah, I've had some hilarious real life examples where I got to see this stuff play out. And outside of some of these real life experiences that were really cool to watch, because like you said, this is reactionary. So after all this talk, where are these techniques? And you get to actually watch, you're almost an observer at that point in some of these really intense situations. You're just watching the decisions you make and what your body ends up doing. And it's been really cool for me. But also, even before that, we would go out, just a few friends, and we would play games, lots of games. Things, again, I don't recommend to anyone who doesn't have a high level of movement skill or falling abilities, but we would, in the dark, be running through the city trying to tag each other with a certain set of rules, and that can create some gnarly situations for sure. You know, when you're taking it to a high level and you're really trying to win those games. So yeah, I have had the opportunity to see that stuff in my life for sure.
What's your favorite story? Favorite experience?
All right. I guess I can talk about this publicly. Well, you brought up the nightclub. I'll try to tell this in kind of a quicker fashion. So Brandon, Douglas, and I were just for fun. I mean, it was free to get in, whatever, I'm pretty sure. Just for fun, trying to roof mission into a nightclub just to see if we could. And we scouted it out well. We didn't make a sound. It was beautiful teamwork. And we got to the top. And it was just a quick lazy vault into the rooftop bar. And we did it pretty smoothly, but I think a customer or someone from across the bar caught a glimpse of us and tipped off the bouncer. And so as we were running down the stairs, we looked over our shoulders and saw the bouncer come through the door. And at that moment, it was really interesting. It was like just a shot of adrenaline. Boom! I could feel it like surge through my body. And Brandon and I both knew like what had to be done. And so we just immediately, I think, like vaulted this railing, dropped an entire stair set to land to roll, and we're running through this club. And as we're doing this, bouncers, there are a lot of bouncers in this club, just see us running and start peeling off the walls. So we're just gaining more people chasing us.
Sharks and minnows.
And, what's that?
It reminds me of the game Sharks and minnows.
Yeah. There you go. And so it just kept getting worse, kept getting out of hand. And we make our way to the front door, and there's a chain there that you'll like this, hurdled, because you're a big advocate of the hurdle. And the front bouncer didn't even know how to react. We were moving at such a high speed, we didn't give him time to think. He just like let us hurdle past him. So we get out, and it was nothing too intense. Yeah, we like dropped some stairs and we hurdled a chain. It wasn't too intense, but we thought we were free, so we were kind of like laughing, and we had maybe gotten a little too comfortable with it. And so we're kind of like laughing and lightly jogging, and then we look over our shoulders, and like the worst character, the one you don't want to see, is the Navy SEAL looking motherfucker who's just sprinting. Like this guy's gonna be where we're at in less than 2 seconds. It was terrifying. And so we immediately went back to full on sprint down this block. There were probably like 5 people behind us, but this guy was definitely ahead of the pack. And Brandon actually pulled a pretty sly move I thought was cool. he crossed traffic right before all these cars closed in, so there's no way to follow him. But he was a little bit ahead of me, so I had to cut a left turn, and then everyone just followed me. And so something really happened around here, where I was running so fast that as I passed someone who apparently knew me, my name had the Doppler effect. It was like, Amos. And so now I'm not only trying to get out of this situation that has gotten hairy fast, but I have no idea who this person is. It could be like a parent of one of the kids I teach. And this is what they think I do outside of the gym. Like, they see me in my normal life and I'm being chased by a Navy SEAL and a bunch of guys. So I cut left again. They're still all on my tail, and probably the worst thing that I possibly could have seen was in this alleyway. It was being blocked by a cop car and a cop sitting. And I'm running directly towards the cop, and I'm just like, how is this possible? Like, I'm totally getting sandwiched here. This is crazy. And so the cop's like getting out of his car, and I realize like now I've got like another person chasing me. I cut a right. And this was kind of a cool moment where I was just like watching my body react. I didn't really think much of this, but I just dropped this massive stairwell to land to roll through the door of another club. And I come out of my roll into a sprint right as I see another bouncer who's checking IDs, and he's just like, oh, wait. And I fly through that club, and I even at one point, once again, I'm seeing more bouncers peel off the wall.
Yeah.
I'm seeing people see me and then start running.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I have like 2 clubs of bouncers and a cop chasing me. And, you know, not even 5 minutes ago, not even 2 minutes ago, things were totally chill. Like, things got out of hand pretty fast. So I cut up the stairs of this place. And at this point, this is probably the most interesting thing about the experience, is that I've always thought, you know, we should train for a certain amount of endurance, depending on, you know, what you need these skills for. But personally, I like a 90-second to 2-minute window.
Yeah.
You should be able to go full force. You know, it's very difficult to go full force longer than that.
Physiological.
You start to see that too. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's kind of a good target, because when it comes to different, you know, things I've read or videos I've watched in emergency situations, oftentimes, if you can at least go extremely hard for that window of time and then get a quick rest and then be back at it again, that's an effective approach. And so it was cool to see like how I dealt with this 2 minutes or so. And I definitely felt when I was going up those stairs, I knew that I have like 5 fresh bouncers on me and I'm starting to taper off.
Yeah.
So I had to make a decision to like figure out another solution here. And so right as I cut out the front of this club, I took an immediate left, baseball slided under these stairs, and just curled into a fetal position. I wasn't completely hidden, but I was hidden enough. And I realized that I just needed to not move and try to catch my breath as much as possible. And it was almost like a movie, like a lot of the bouncers, and I think maybe a police officer, I couldn't tell, their voices were hilarious. They came up out of this club and it was just like, which way do you go? You go that way, I'll go this way. Like, it was like almost like a movie. And so they split up and go looking separate ways. And the whole time I'm just like thinking, I'm running, trying to refresh my mind of all the different Brazilian jiu-jitsu techniques I know, Aikido techniques, like, okay, if he grabs my right shoulder, I'm just kind of trying to refresh. Okay, what most likely are they going to do when they grab me? And how can I cleverly get loose and then put in the second wind run?
Yeah.
And so they didn't find me back in that space. So I just changed my clothes, and a few of the bouncers actually stayed at the front of the club and just started talking and having a conversation. And so, you know, I chilled out for a little bit. I recovered completely, changed my clothes, and then just walked right past the bouncers that were chasing me. And then met up with Brandon, and we laughed our asses off at like how crazy out of control that got so quick.
Yeah.
We both got away. So, actually the craziest part of this story, this is funny. This is an update 2 years later, maybe even more. I'm hanging out with this guy and he says, oh yeah, I work at this one club. And it was the club that this happened at.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh really? How long you been working there? He's like, oh, like 5 years now. I was like, huh, you guys ever chase people? You ever have any like good bouncer chases in there? And he's like, dude, let me tell you about this crazy story. And it was so funny because over the years it had been embellished. Like we had been turned into legends. No one knew who we were. So it was just like among the bouncers, they actually hired a parkour guy after this happened. They actually found a parkour guy and hired him as a bouncer. So he tells me this story that's so embellished. He's like, yeah, these guys were straight up ninjas. Like he was giving details that definitely didn't happen. Like it was over the top. And I did find out that the crazy guy was a Navy SEAL after all.
Oh, there you go.
He actually was in training to do that. And yeah, at the end of the conversation, I just like casually threw it out there like, cool, yeah, that was me. And he had like been thinking about this for years, I guess, because we're in a totally different situation. This is years later. And his initial reaction was to grab me. He's like, finally, I got you. But then I think he realized, like, once he like tensed up, that like he can't do anything about it at this point. And so he went from like thinking he needed to grab me to like, oh my God, you're a G, and like slap my hand. He's just like so stoked to meet me. And yeah, so wild time, learned a lot about, and what my endurance was like, how it feels to be just shot with adrenaline. Like you don't get a chance. Someone just shoots you in the head with adrenaline in that moment, and what it's like to watch your body and just, you don't really make decisions. It's almost like falling. And throughout that entire experience, there wasn't a single point I felt like I really made a conscious decision. It was just like, oh, that's not good. That's not good. Oh, cop is involved now. Oh, I'm now in another club. I'm not going to show this guy my ID because I'm sprinting. Yeah, it was just watching myself deal with one bad thing after the other.
So what you're saying is, if people really want to learn parkour, they run from some bouncers.
If you really want to know you can do it, you should purposely put yourself. No, definitely not. That's not an ideal way.
But I think it's interesting because as teachers, like it's interesting because for years I never did any rooftop stuff because I was afraid of getting, cited for trespassing and ending up in the paper and being a bad representation of the community around me. So my ability to deal with heights didn't start developing until I kind of left urban parkour and started training in trees. So now like almost all the really scary high jumps that I've done have been from boulder to boulder or tree branch to tree branch.
Yeah.
And I found there's something really powerful to be learned when you're dealing with heights. Like I think there's some really profound lessons up there. Maybe it was a good thing. I was like 7 years into my practice before I even moved up into those areas. But as explorers, as people on the edges of these things, as people trying to develop, you have to push yourself in ways, like Eric Paulson's a famous martial artist. He used to go to clubs that he knew were really rough so he could test things out, right? This was before MMA. They didn't have that ability to step into the ring. And,
right.
Like I worked as a bouncer for 3 years. And so I got to have a number of physical confrontations there. None of them that went really to like fisticuffs, just wrestling basically. But I got to know that I had the wherewithal to push myself into those situations. But I think it's a really interesting thing for us to think about. Like, sometimes we sanitize our practice because yeah, most people should never do that.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is I kind of see myself as a guinea pig for these ideas. Like what happens when you use these drills that I'm putting forward? How does that play out in your life? But the nice thing is that you don't need those things. You don't need to put yourself in those situations, like go to clubs where you might have altercations. With parkour, like even just some basic improvisational A to B drills can enhance so much your ability to have better reactions. And again, like a lot of us aren't living lives where this is a probability. So I don't think people should be focusing on this. I'm not like so pure that I'm like, if you're not training like this, you're not doing parkour. I guess more so I find interest in it. And for people who do have lifestyles, maybe they work maybe are Navy SEALs, or they work in some way where they would need these skills, then maybe it's more interesting for them. But ultimately, you can do this stuff very safely. You don't have to train at heights to get some of these skills, although testing yourself is important, and maybe it'll happen for you. Yeah. But a lot of these basic drills and skills will go a long way. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of content on Parkour Randori online. Mm-hmm. I'm sitting on a mountain of stuff with that, and I just haven't had the resources or time to really develop a lot of it. So a lot of that I do in workshops and seminars at this point, if people want access to that.
Cool. Well, it's probably a good place actually for us to wrap up for today. It was really super fun to chat with you and catch up after all these years. I think, we still need to talk.
While, man.
We've got lots of stuff to talk about as far as methods and things. And so we'll have to do this again and kind of cultivate more of these thoughts. But yeah, if people want to train with you, if they want to learn more about your stuff, if they want to get on this break falling course, how should they do that?
Are you going to have links in the notes, or?
Yeah, I'll put links in the notes.
Cool. So probably one of the easiest ways is at this point, I've put together an online course for the art of falling. And that expresses my unifying theory of how all these different falling continuums fit together, so that you can learn the isolated techniques, learn how to integrate them into drills and improvise them, so that it's reactionary. And I've put a ton of time and effort into that. And that can be found at parkouredu.org, where under our training programs, you'll find the art of falling. Also, you can find all my projects if you're interested in reading more about Parkour Randori, or my business, Apex School of Movement, my other company, Parkour EDU, various things like that. You can just go to amosrendao.com, AMOSRENDAO. And through those two places, you can find almost any thing you'd want and be able to contact me there.
Cool. Well, thanks again for coming on, Amos. I look forward to future conversations and chasing around through the woods someday.
Me too. Me too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Evolve Move Play podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a review on iTunes if you can. Finally, as we mentioned before the show, this is a listener-supported podcast, and if you want to have the most regular content, have the best guests on, and give you guys the best quality of audio and video, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Thank you very much, and I look forward to sharing more with you guys soon.